The EOS R is arguably one of Canon's most important releases in recent memory. It gave users an idea of how Canon was finally going to approach the mirrorless market. And even though it's not objectively perfect, in the time since its release, the EOS R has gained a solid reputation as a great camera for both photo and video. My name is Tom, this is the Enthusiasm Project, and today we're celebrating my 1-year anniversary with my beloved EOS R. So let's use this milestone as a chance to dive into a long-term review of my experience with the EOS R over the past year. But before we begin, there are two things that I do want to point out. One, I mainly use this camera for video. So even though I've been very happy with the photos it's helped me to take, my perspective is geared mostly and very heavily towards the video performance and that functionality. And number two, I did not expect to like this camera when I got it. Prior to the EOS R, the 6D Mark II was my favorite camera. It was my camera of choice. I love this thing, and I still do. I still use it all the time in my videos. And when I needed a second camera, I was pretty set on just getting another 6D. But with a few price drops, and knowing that mirrorless really is the future, I decided to see if the R would work for me. And 1 year later, as much as I still love the 6D, the R is absolutely my favorite camera. And I'm telling you this because this is going to be a pretty glowing review. And I want you to know that I was pretty resistant to this camera at first. So the odds were not in its favor at all. So how did it win me over? Well, let's start with the main things that I appreciate with the EOS R after using it for a year. Right off the bat, the EOS R delivers incredible image quality, and for a camera, that's really what matters most. On top of that, it's super durable, it has great battery life, it's basically everything you would expect from a Canon camera, and I mean that in a good way. Having used it in conditions that range from freezing and rainy to literally more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit and blistering hot, I've had no issues with this camera. It's not overheated, it hasn't given me any errors, it hasn't frozen. It's just been reliable, and I really hope that I'm not jinxing myself by saying that. And of course, it's got that awesome flip out, fully articulating touch LCD screen. I am 100% spoiled by how nice this screen is. And I really don't think that any of those features are gonna come as a surprise to you, but let's move on to some of the other qualities that have really helped me to appreciate the EOS R. Sorry about that. The RF mount. It is the future of where Canon is going with its lenses. Canon announced several months back that they're still manufacturing EF lenses, but they're not developing any new ones. So you can still buy them, they're still making them, get brand new ones, they're wonderful lenses, but they're not adding anything else to that EF lineup. They are putting all of their eggs, their camera eggs, into that RF basket, and they're building out that lineup, which also, to me, makes it pretty clear that we're gonna start to see more and more R series cameras, or at least cameras with RF mounts, in the future. And with the EF to RF adapter, you have access to all of Canon's RF, EF, and EF-S series lenses, which is like hundreds of lenses. I don't personally own any RF lenses yet, although the ones I've borrowed have been terrific. I use the adapter constantly and it works perfectly for me. I have no issues with autofocus or lens communication. You forget that you're using the adapter most of the time because it works so well. Moving on now to a less obvious feature that I love about this camera. The top display is terrific. It's easy to read and displays useful info, so what more do you need? And most of Canon cameras, and lots of cameras, have these top displays and have had them for a very long time. But the EOS R is a little more versatile, and I've found it to be easier to read, and in fact, I found myself using it so often that at this point I would consider it a must-have feature on any future camera I purchase. There's a couple times I've thought about getting the RP as a second camera because it's got that full frame sensor, that great image quality, but that top-down display is so nice. There's so many times, especially me being in this position when I'm standing up and trying to adjust the camera, just being able to see what's happening on the top-down display is really, really helpful. Let's spend a couple minutes and talk about price. It's always risky to speculate on price and future camera releases because things can change so suddenly. So here are my current thoughts. I was able to get my R at a decent price through Canon Price Watch. This is not a sponsored video, and I did also make a not sponsored video all about Canon Price Watch and why I use them to get good gear at really low prices. And since then, the price for the EOS R has only gotten better. Originally released at $2,300, you can now regularly find the EOS R on sale for $1,650, $1,700, kind of in that price range, which I think makes it incredibly competitive. And as of this recording, Canon has announced all the full specs for the EOS R5, and they've made some preliminary announcements for the R6, and both of those cameras sound, well, incredible. The R5, as the higher end model, basically a 5D mirrorless camera, packs in the most features, but of course, those are gonna come at a much higher price than the R when it was originally released. And for me, that likely puts it beyond my budget. Not to mention the new memory cards, the CF Express cards for the R5 are really expensive right now, and it's important to factor that into the cost if you're planning to purchase the camera. If you're gonna use that camera mostly for video, you can expect realistically to pay between $400 and $600 just for one memory card that's gonna handle those really high quality video files. From what I've gathered, it seems likely that the original R probably won't get a second version. Instead, it seems like it's going to be absorbed into the R6. But again, the R6 presumably being a mirrorless 6D series camera, which is kind of competitive with where the R is, will probably sell at a lower price than the R5, probably miss a few of those higher end features, but even that will likely be a higher price than what the R currently sells for. So while I am interested in what these new cameras have to offer, I'm actually more interested in how they will affect the price of the original R, because I would genuinely love to have a second R as part of my workflow. And if that price comes down to below $1,500, that would be amazing. Why on earth would I want a second R? Well, obviously I love it. In addition to working on a few more complex projects that require multiple cameras sometimes, the R has just become such a critical part of my day-to-day workflow. With clean HDMI out and incredible autofocus, it's actually become my go-to webcam. When I'm not using it to film my videos, it pretty much lives behind my computer for Zoom meetings, my online classes that I teach, podcasts, live streams, interviews, pretty much anything else that I need. And sometimes it fills that role for hours and hours every single day. And I know it seems like a little bit extra to have an EOS R as your camera for a Zoom meeting, but that's fine with me. And speaking of that autofocus, holy cow, I've never had a camera with better autofocus for both photo and video. It's pretty unbelievable, and it's no secret that Canon's dual pixel autofocus is really top notch. It's gotten great reviews for many years, but with the addition of improved eye autofocus on the R, this thing is unreal. As someone who typically films at wide open apertures like 1.4, this really helps keep things looking sharp and in focus without any of that focus breathing or those inaccuracies that can happen. Even on the 6D Mark II, you would see the background kind of pulsing in and out as I move closer and away from the camera while I'm talking in my videos. Eye autofocus just locks on and it keeps everything very smooth, and it works really, really well. Even sometimes it won't let go. If I try to show something to the camera, it still wants to focus on me. I have to completely block my face and then it will focus on that and then it will come back. And as someone who does a lot of video work, I'm very appreciative of how many different resolutions the EOS R offers. I typically film at 24 frames a second with 1080p and all eye compression. And that super high bitrate of 180 megabits per second delivers insane quality. And then I'll also switch to 60 frames a second for slow motion when I need it. And then I do switch to 4K from time to time, which has that completely ridiculous 400 megabit per second bitrate. And I use that for some of my tighter shots. And as you know, I don't personally have a disdain for that cropped 4K. Of course, just to be honest, if I had the choice, I would prefer full frame 4K, but the high bitrate, high quality 1080p footage scales up to 4K with no issues and just looks terrific. So let's switch gears and jump into a few of the negatives, because I think that while it is easy to nitpick spec sheets, I only have two real complaints about the EOS R after using it for a year, and both of them have to do with the physical functionality of the camera. First, the proximity sensor on the back of the camera is way too sensitive, and I don't mean that it starts crying if you offer constructive criticism. The whole purpose of the sensor is to disable the LCD screen when you put your eye up to the electronic viewfinder, or the EVF. But If there's like anything at all within like 6 to 8 inches behind the camera, the sensor will turn off the LCD display. And this can be really frustrating when you're working in a tight location or you're trying to use a gimbal that has pieces running behind the camera like the Ronin S. Fortunately, you can turn that sensor off, but in doing so, you have to select to either have the LCD screen or the EVF turned on all the time. And the other one that you don't choose will just be turned off, which I don't really like that option because the sensor does do a good job at switching between the two. And I think that that's a really helpful feature to be filming with a display and then it gets too bright or something happens and you need to put the camera up to your eye and it switches automatically. I like that a lot. I just wish there were a sensitivity setting so I could tone it down a bit. Don't know if that's something that could ever be added with a firmware update, but wow, that would be terrific. My second con with this camera is the way that you switch between photo and video modes. At this point, after a year, I built up enough muscle memory that it's not quite as annoying as it used to be, but it's still clunky. It is objectively clunky. To switch from one mode to the other, you need to press the mode button, then info, and then either press the set button or halfway press the shutter button to switch fully into that mode. That's 3 button interactions to switch between photo and video mode, which if you're trying to do very quickly, it can sometimes get in the way a little bit. Now, if you're in photo mode and you press the video record button, the camera will start recording and it will default to whatever settings you have set as custom function 3. So that's kind of a little workaround, but for me, those aren't always the settings that I want to use, so it's still not the perfect solution. If this camera just used the same photo video switch that every higher end Canon camera has used since the original 7D back in 2009, this switch is a perfect design. And even though I don't personally dislike the multi-function touch bar on the EOS R like some people do, I actually use it to adjust my audio levels and I think that that's really helpful. I was very curious when I noticed that the R5 does away with the multi-function bar and I thought, oh, that means they're gonna go back to the old switch. They fixed it. Nope. It's still the same process, even on the new flagship camera, to switch between photo and video modes. So please, Canon, bring back the old switch. It was perfect. But in the grand scheme of things, I recognize those are actually pretty small complaints and I've been able to work around them or get used to them pretty easily. And like I said, you can find flaws with anything if you look hard enough, but after putting hundreds of hours of use into this camera over the past year, these are the things that stood out to me the most in real world usage. And in the end, how would I rate this camera, the EOS R? Easy, 10 out of 10. Of course, there's room for improvement, and that sounds like a very generous rating, but this thing lets me do what I need to do and delivers outstanding results every single time. In fact, I'll give it an 11 out of 10 because it's so dang fun to use. And that's something I don't think I can really communicate effectively through video, but the EOS R is just simply a joy to use. The ergonomics, the functionality, just everything about it make me excited to pick it up and use it every single time. Over the years, I've learned that there's no such thing as a perfect camera, but there's a very big difference between something that is objectively perfect by all measures and something that's perfect for you. And I think that it's very important when you're researching a camera or anything like that, that you find what works for you the best. I love the EOS R. I gave it an 11 out of 10, which is a ridiculous rating. Other people might give it like a 4 out of 10. So it kind of depends on what you need specifically. When I first got into digital photography and cameras back in like the early 2000s, I would be on all of the message boards where everyone does like pixel peeping and color charts and all this stuff, which is very helpful. And there's definitely a place for that in the world. But what I discovered was it's so easy, no matter what piece of gear someone was testing, they would find imperfections. And if you were excited about getting something new, you'd be like, oh, this thing has a problem, it doesn't work that good. Eventually what I learned is invest in a thing that seems like it's gonna work the best for you, and then all those little like nitpicks and details usually just kind of disappear when you're actually using it. There's a very big difference between how a piece of equipment performs on technical tests in a controlled environment and what you actually get when you take that thing and go out into the world to use it for real. And I've said it before, I'm sure I'll say it many more times, but we should really just appreciate that these tools are available to us to use and that they're relatively affordable. It's basically impossible to find a bad camera these days, and it's all about finding the camera that works best for you.